Welcome to the Survivalist Podcast with Mark Puhali, Doc Montana, and Matt Gould. In each episode of the Survivalist Podcast, we look at different events and catastrophes that could happen to you. Then we give you the knowledge, resources, and recommendations you need to survive. The Survivalist Podcast is brought to you by Forge Survival Supply.
Find peace of mind for your family at Forge Survival Supply. Founded by United States Marine Corps veterans, Forge is the premier destination for quality American-made survival and emergency preparedness products. Freeze-dried foods, water filtration, fire starters, fully equipped bug-out bags. Find everything your family needs to stay safe, protected, and nourished during times of uncertainty at ForgeSurvivalSupply.com. As a listener of this program, Forge Survival Supply would like to give you an additional 10% savings. That's right, an additional 10% off your entire order, plus free shipping by entering discount code SURVIVOR at checkout. That's ForgeSurvivalSupply.com and use discount code SURVIVOR.
This podcast is sponsored by Epic Water Bottles and Pitchers. Every year, millions of Americans get sick from drinking contaminated water. Epic water filters remove chlorine, heavy metals, chemicals, industrial pollutants, pesticides and herbicides, iodine, and microbiologicals from your water. All of this is done with BPA-free, recyclable bottles and pitchers that are made in the USA. So keep your family safe and healthy with Epic Water. You can use the promo code WATER at epicwaterfilters.com for 10% off your order there. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Survivalist Podcast. This is episode 23. This is Matt Gould, and I'm here with Doc Montana as usual. How are you, Doc?
Doing great.
Great. And today, I'm very excited to welcome our guest, Gershon Ben Keren, who, a little bit about him. Hello, Gershon. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
And thanks for being here. So Gershon is the head instructor at the Boston Krav Maga School. Is that what it's called, Boston Krav Maga School, or...
We refer to it as Krav Maga Yashir Boston, but if you're looking for Boston Krav Maga, you'll find us.
Okay. And Gershon is a 5th degree black belt in Krav Maga and was tested for your black belts, his black belts in Israel,
yep,
where he also received his teaching certification. He's been trained by some of the Israeli Defense Force's most experienced and respected Krav Maga instructors, and that's where Krav Maga originated, right, Gershon?
Correct. Yes, that's correct.
And also, he's the author of Real-World Solutions to Real-World Violence.
Yep.
So welcome.
Thank you.
So we've talked a bit in the past about the role of security in survivalism. And Doc, I wonder if you would mind just giving a quick debrief about, again, the sort of core beliefs of survivalism and where security fits in.
Well, the classic is that security is obviously number one because there's no point in doing anything else if you're threatened or under the control of somebody or running for your life. Then obviously the classics of water and food and fire and shelter fall to the bottom. But if you can establish yourself and feel secure, then you can move on to the true longer-term survival. So what we're looking at here is I could see lots of scenarios where you might need to fight your way out of the city or encounter somebody in the backcountry, and it's going to be a standoff till one of you, arises as the victor because of maybe limited resources that somebody might be wanting to take. So in this case, survival and security are hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. So you could say that survival is security.
Yes, perfect. And also, I'll point out that all these techniques that Gershon Ben Keren will talk about are useful in non-extreme scenarios as well. So, it's everyday survival as well, right, Gershon? So could you start by
absolutely
talking about different types of violence?
Yeah, we tend to think about when we imagine violent situations as kind of being alone in a deserted place and somebody just attacks us. When we actually break violence down, we can break it down into two basic types, which is premeditated violence and spontaneous violence. So premeditated violence would be something like a mugger who goes out, acquires a weapon, goes to a location, selects a victim, and there's a level of planning to it. they've come to the situation with the intent of causing somebody harm. If we look at spontaneous situations, they're situations where your actions and behaviors have caused somebody to become violent. So if you cut somebody off in traffic, spill a drink over them, etc., the person didn't come to that situation with the intent of becoming violent towards you, but your actions and behaviors have caused them to become violent. And it might be not that it's real. It might be that you didn't spill the drink over the person. It's just that they perceived that you spilled the drink over them. So we kind of have that breakdown in terms of premeditation and spontaneity. It's also key to note that in premeditated violence, a person can be motivated by different things. So they might want to acquire your resources. So as Doc just said, in a situation where, the rule of law is broken down and everybody's out for themselves, it could be that your resources are food or water. It could be in another situation day to day, such as a mugging situation, where the predator wants your resources, and your resources in this case are your wallet, your mobile phone. There's also motivations where they might want you. So they might want you as a hostage for a bargaining chip. They might want to sexually assault you, but they want you. So when we're looking at how we handle violence, we need to understand the situation that we're in and understand if it's premeditated or spontaneous, if the predator wants resources, or whether they want us. Because we're looking at solutions to violent situations rather than necessarily just techniques. And this is sometimes where self-defense becomes very simplistic, where somebody creates a situation and says, if somebody sticks a knife to you, this is what you do. Where really we need to understand why they're sticking a knife to you. Did they plan to do this? Was it something that happened spontaneously? Are they sticking the knife to you in order to get your resources or to move you to another location where they can cause you harm? So when we start looking at it, violence is not a simple thing. It's kind of complex and multifaceted.
Yeah, and so I'm assuming that your reaction to the violence would be different based on what the motivations are.
To a certain extent, a lot of it's about how quickly that you can spot a situation developing. I would hope that with training, nobody suddenly finds themselves with a knife stuck to them, that they've been able to predict and identify pre-violence indicators so that they've been able to see that situation develop. It is key to understand the motivation, because if you're dealing with somebody who, let's say you spill the drink over them, they become aggressive towards you, and then they pull a knife. The problem you have is that they don't have a goal or an outcome in mind. So they basically can't perceive any alternative solutions other than acting violently towards you. So that's a very different situation to a mugger who has a goal and an outcome in mind when they stick a knife to you. So if a mugger sticks a knife to you and demands your wallet, you can hand it over, and in 99% of situations, that mugger's going to leave. If you spilt a drink over somebody and somebody sticks a knife at your throat, it's very, very different, because you don't know what's actually going to appease the situation for them. So although in one sense a knife at your throat is a knife at your throat, in understanding the motivation and the threat level behind it and what possible non-violent solutions are available to you, you can possibly have a non-violent outcome. So it is key, as you said, to understand what the motivation is, and then adjust your response accordingly.
Yeah, that's really good. Doc, did you have a question?
Oh, well, I was wondering, he answered it, what you do with that knowledge if you knew why somebody was attacking you.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Sense. Yeah, I was curious about what you would do with that information. Why someone's attacking you, how does that change the fight? But you just cleared that up right away.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it really...
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and it's very important to understand the difference between a threat where somebody is presenting you with a weapon and kind of giving you options, to somebody who just starts attacking you with a knife, trying to cut and slash you. Obviously, in that situation, it's purely down to response. You've got to defend yourself. But when somebody shows you a weapon, one of the questions you kind of have to ask yourself is, why are they showing me this weapon? Why are they not using it? And that can show that there's a possible non-physical solution to that situation.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So you know what
like
I was
in the movies, I guess, huh?
Yeah. What I was thinking is we should back up and you should tell us what Krav Maga is. I think most people have an idea that it's some kind of very intense martial art that was invented in Israel, but I don't know if everybody knows exactly what it is.
Okay, so there's a few misconceptions outside of Israel as to what Krav Maga is. Unlike a lot of martial arts, a lot of Krav Maga instructors want to kind of make out that what they teach is the most authentic Krav Maga, and they can trace their lineage back to the founder, etc., etc. Krav Maga in reality is a generic term that the Israeli Defense Forces use to describe a variety of fighting systems that they use. If you start to think about what a modern military looks like, it has many different agencies, organizations, and departments, all with miscellaneous functions. So an infantry soldier has a requirement to, be able to use their long barrel weapon, the Tavor or the M4, as an impact weapon when it's run out of ammunition, jammed, etc. Where somebody who is working in a covert role isn't going to have a weapon with them. So Krav Maga is kind of a very broad term. What links Krav Maga systems together is a common set of core principles and concepts. So these principles and concepts might manifest them differently with the different agencies and the different requirements that they have. So when we talk about Krav Maga, what we're really talking about is a methodology. So one of the ideas of Krav Maga is that movement should be instinctive and instinctual. So how you'll naturally react when assaulted or threatened, rather than how you might think you'd like to react. There's ideas around that attack must follow defense at the earliest opportunity, and this is where Krav Maga is kind of known as a very aggressive, engaging system of fighting stroke self-defense, because as soon as that defense has been made, you need to be on the attack, because you don't want to be giving your assailant any other opportunities. In fact, if you have the opportunity to act preemptively, that's obviously preferable. We have ideas around separating the difference between a life-threatening attack and a non-life-threatening attack. So if somebody goes to strangle or choke me, I'll want to clear that choke or strangulation because it's life-threatening before I attack them. If somebody grabs my lapel or wrist in a non-life-threatening attack, then I don't need to worry about clearing that lapel grab or the wrist grab. I can simply attack them. And so there's all these kind of ideas and principles which are the foundation for Krav Maga. And some of them for civilian settings, we need to kind of adapt and change. So for instance, if somebody grabs my lapel in a bar, a Krav Maga principle might guide me to start attacking them. But if I'm in a bar where they've also got acquaintances and accomplices, that might be me initiating a multiple attacker scenario, which I stand very little chance of actually surviving. So often when we look at these military principles, when we take them into the civilian setting, we've got to kind of alter them slightly or understand that the context within which violence occurs is somewhat different. So we always look at Krav Maga not as the techniques, but what are the principles and the concepts that underlie them. And that is what the IDF uses to kind of determine what is good self-defense, what is good combat technique, and what is not. So rather than thinking about Krav Maga as a kind of style, it's good to think of it more as a methodology. Hope that makes sense.
Oh, that's so clear.
Oh,
that was
beautiful.
Go ahead. Brilliant. It was brilliant. Yeah, I really think that is fascinating. So now with that backdrop, let's talk about how human predators operate. And I'm interested in this because this is what, so I guess we're talking about premeditated human predators for the most part. You can clarify that. But especially in survival scenarios, we can imagine that human predators are going to be everywhere.
Right.
Well, Matt?
Yes, Doc.
Matt, can I ask? I was going to save this for later, but you've defined human predators, and one of my questions that'll come up that might be able to fit in here is I'm also, where I live, there's just as likely a chance I'm going to run into a mountain lion or a black bear or a rabid raccoon or something. So I'm often wondering, is there an application for animals?
I would say yes. If we look at how, so I'll start off by saying there's actually situational components to violence, because this is worth kind of understanding before we get to the actual process that predatory individuals use and rely on. And we've got certain situational components, and two of the most key ones are location, where the assault, the attack, the incident takes place, and relationship, which is the relationship you have with your assailant/attacker. And a lot of times when we imagine violence, we're imagining that we're going to be attacked by a stranger. But that might not actually be the case. If we look at sexual assaults on women, most women are attacked by somebody they know in their home or somebody else's. So whenever I'm trying to understand violence, one of the things I try and understand is which is the key player. Is location the key player, or is relationship? And I'll give you a real-life example. About 3 years ago in Boston, where I'm based, there was a young woman, Amy Lord, who was abducted, and she was taken to a series of ATMs, and it looked like it was an express kidnapping, that she was going to be kidnapped, taken to these ATMs, made to withdraw money. And at the end of her ordeal, she ended up being killed. We run a free women's self-defense program on a Saturday, and we were inundated from women of her age group who were located in South Boston, which is where she lived. And the natural assumption was that the location of South Boston was the key factor in her abduction. It turned out that it was. But if we imagine that Amy Lord had a relationship with her attacker, it was an ex-boyfriend, it could have been a drug dealer, it could have been somebody she worked with, that relationship would have been the key factor rather than the location. So it wouldn't have mattered to any other woman walking around South Boston. They would never be targeted. So one of the things we need to understand when we look at predatory individuals is, do they have a prior relationship to us? Do they know our movements? Do they know where we'll be at a particular time? Or is the relationship one where they're a stranger to us? When they're a stranger, and this would be where I'd say this process equates to animals as well, because obviously, wild animals don't really form a relationship with us. This process would kind of be the same. So the first thing that any predator will do is they'll select a location. And they're going to select a location where there is the greatest abundance of prey. So if that's a mugger, they're probably going to be looking at somewhere like transit stops, shopping malls, relatively crowded places, parking lots, where there's a high traffic of people. If it's an animal predator, they're going to do the same. They're going to go where the prey are. And this is where we look at things like human violence and animal violence, there are definite parallels. Once they've set themselves up in that location, they're going to select a victim. In terms of human prey, there's been several studies that have been done, and there's three things which we know that predators look for, even if they can't self-identify them. One is victims who walk with the head looking at the ground, so they're unaware of their surroundings. Head looking down is also a kind of signal of depression and low self-esteem, so that's a good signal that somebody isn't going to fight back. They walk with an unnatural stride length to height. You could kind of look on this as athleticism. If it was from an animal perspective, animals that have injuries are obviously more suitable prey because they're going to run slower. They're not going to be able to fight back as well as those that are in full health. So one of the ones is with humans is an unnatural stride length to height. So people who walk,
does that mean shorter usually? Like if you had a bad backache or something, and you?
It could be both. The studies that have been done don't really make much differentiation. So it could be somebody who's shuffling due to injury. Shuffling is also a signal of depression and low self-esteem. But it could also be somebody striding around. There's some self-defense skills which will tell you that the way to avoid being a victim is to basically make yourself look bigger, look tougher. And the first thing you do to look bigger is take longer strides, which basically ends up attracting the attention of predatory individuals. Another thing is fluidity of movement, people whose top body movement doesn't really reflect or mirror their bottom movement. They might also look for things such as people who, when they walk through a crowd, are always overly apologetic for getting in the way of people, because this would be a signal that this is somebody who's so scared of confrontation that they're apologizing for things before they happen. Yeah. So you have a whole load of things with victim selection. There used to be a sexual predator whose MO was to watch women in shopping locations such as supermarkets, pushing trolleys. And if somebody, this was how he'd select his victim, if somebody bumped into their shopping cart and they apologized, so it wasn't their wrong, it was the other person's, and they were already apologizing, saying, I'm terribly sorry, he would take this as a signal that this person was so averse to confrontation that they would rather take the blame for something that wasn't their fault. And that was how he selected his victims. So there's a lot of behaviors and actions that we give off.
That's fascinating. He would have a field day in Canada. But sorry, I couldn't resist. I couldn't resist.
In the UK as well, everybody's apologizing. And the thing is that you don't want to be, that aggressive person, but at the same time, you don't want to be overly apologetic, because that can obviously be taken as a weakness. Once they've selected a victim, they're going to carry out a level of surveillance on them. And this is, again, just like animal predators. Sharks will watch their victim, their prey, for about 10 minutes before they actually make an attack. Human predators might not take that long, but they're going to make sure that they've selected the right victim before they make their actual attack. And there's certain signals that they give off when they do this. One of them is something we refer to as target glancing, where they'll keep glancing towards the person that they've targeted. And they'll often change position, just like a shark, when they do this. Because if somebody was standing in the same place and kept glancing towards you, it's fairly easy for you to pick up and identify that. If they glance, move to another location and glance, you're kind of unsure whether, are they actually looking at me, or are they just looking at the environment from their new position and perspective? So one of the things we're always telling people to be aware of is be interested in those that are interested in you, because there's a reason why they're interested in you. The final part of the process is their movement towards you. At some point, they're going to have to synchronize their movement to you, whether that's them following you, whether that's them approaching you, whether that's intercepting you on the path that you make, or waiting for you. And when we start looking at this process, we can understand how we can actually avoid violence. So if we understand that criminals, predators go where the prey is, we need to be more aware in crowded areas. You're naturally aware when you're on your own. If we understand how they select victims, we can harden ourselves by not behaving like a victim. If we understand that when somebody's conducting surveillance on us, they need to glance towards us, we can pick up on those signals. If we understand that they have to synchronize their movement to ours, we can pick up on that. And when we look at all these things, it's actually a fairly long and detailed process, and we have a lot of opportunities to predict, identify, and avoid both being targeted and assaulted.
Wow. I don't know if I've ever heard anyone put something so clearly and so, succinctly about this behavior.
I've heard something, maybe Matt, I don't know if you've heard this, that sometimes folks from out west are not very good mugging targets in big cities like New York, because there's something about them that says they'll fight back, besides cowboy boots and a cowboy hat. That just their way of interacting with people is not quite as apologetic. It's not confrontational, but it's, if somebody asks for your wallet, you're going to get a fight.
Definitely. And I think
conveyed.
I think that, there's a lot that we convey in terms of our body language. What we're trying to do in the sort of self-protection industry is formalize it and say, look, this is an action and behavior of somebody who is projecting a non-victim image. This is somebody who's projecting a victim image. When you actually talk to predatory individuals, they can't tell you why they select the victims that they do. They'll just say they look like a victim. I remember watching a sort of, coming back to the animals, a nature documentary where it was following a pack of wolves hunting elk. And you suddenly see as the wolves sort of break and scatter the herd, that they all focus in on this one elk. And the cameraman focused in, and its back leg was slightly hopped. Not that I would be able to see or identify that, but to a wolf, that's a clear sign that this is an injured animal who's not going to run as fast. And this is one of the things that we found, my background's in psychology, with interviewing predatory individuals. They can't tell you why they select the victims they do. They'll just say that person looks like a victim. And just like the wolf, because they're used to viewing the world in terms of prey and predators, they just know what prey looks like. And part of our job, because we don't actually view the world as they do, is to try and learn what are the actual behaviors and actions of prey stroke victims so we can avoid adopting them. And I wouldn't be surprised if people from different geographies with their daily interactions project different images to different predatory individuals.
Right. And I
Makes
guess,
sense.
way back, way down deep, humans are the ultimate apex predator, right? So we must have these skills built into us from millions of years.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a lot of what we're doing in self-defense training is really putting people back in touch with these skills. Because at the moment, it may not seem like it depending on where you live, but we're kind of living in the safest times ever. This is not Gangs of New York era society that we're living in, where violence was a daily occurrence. And so we've kind of become detached from those instincts and those signals. Most people, when they become adrenalized now, recognize it as an uncomfortable feeling that they want to get rid of. 200 years ago, when somebody was adrenalized, they'd have recognized that as a survival instinct, a warning signal that they now need to prepare to defend themselves, to disengage. So we have all these things inherently within us which will protect us. We just need to get back in touch with them. And that's really, in many senses, what effective self-defense and personal safety training is.
Yeah, I love that. And of course, I think I know that we're living in the safest time that we've ever been in, which is why I can never understand the rhetoric about how dangerous it is that politicians are always saying, because it doesn't make any sense. At the same time, I think we need to be prepared for some kind of we're just, in terms of human history, we're just a blip away from the time when it was, every man for himself, right?
And things can break down very quickly. I mean, it might not be that law and order breaks down for 20 years. But if you look at things like civil disturbance and unrest, just rioting, you look back to the LA riots, and law enforcement's policy was to step back and kind of let the rioters exhaust themselves. If you're in that situation, law and order is effectively broken down, and you need to know what to do to survive. So I think sometimes when people are talking about the breakdown of society, it's something unimaginable. But I think when you put the breakdown of society that might just be in short periods of time, then yes, we need to be prepared to deal with those and acknowledge that they do happen.
Yeah. Or you can think about Venezuela right now, right? Which I think people are fighting over food and starving to death, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, and that's, not very far from here. The next part of this episode is brought to you by the Perry Blade Survival Knife, designed by SAS legend Mel Perry. For more information, visit perryblade.com. That's Perry, P-A-R-R-Y, blade.com. One more thing, don't forget to rate us on iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, or wherever you're listening to this podcast. It's very important to us. Please rate us. Let's move on to effective decision making. I think you have a whole outline for this, right?
Yeah. The first thing we have to acknowledge is what's our default decision-making process when we're put under stress and duress. And this is something to understand, that if you're dealing with an aggressive or violent situation, your decision-making process is not going to be the same as if you're kind of in an office or a room and you've got time and calm to deliberate in. And the first thing, like I was just saying, about when people become adrenalized and recognize danger, their first reflex is actually denial, because they don't want to admit to themselves that the situation they're in is potentially life-threatening. I think it's the average evacuation time when the second plane hit the second tower on 9/11 was somewhere around something like 6 minutes, 46 seconds. That's the average time. So the plane hit.
Say that again? Yeah, go ahead.
It's 6 minutes, 46 seconds. So when the second plane hit the second tower on 9/11, people on average sat at their desk for that length of time before evacuating. In many cases, these people had been given information through email and phone calls about what had happened. So they were actually having a conscious awareness that a plane had hit their tower. But emotionally, they were remained in a state of denial, because it seemed just such an extreme situation that it was easier, as it were, to deny that this was happening, because denial is a good coping mechanism, than actually accept it.
Right.
Obviously,
So these are people that were in the tower, tower that it hit.
In the tower. 9/11. Yeah,
wow.
9/11 Commission, that's what they worked it out at. So obviously some people left sooner, and obviously, because it's an average, some people left later, and some people never left at all. And that's how strong denial is. I've done a lot of door and bar security, and I would often see people who were engaging with an aggressive individual who was very obviously about to attack them, stand there laughing. They just couldn't believe that this is what was happening to them. That's how far we've become removed from that response to adrenaline. Once somebody accepts their situation, the next phase that they have to go through is deliberation. So you have a number of options that might be open to you. So if we take the 9/11 situation, that you could evacuate, you could possibly stay at your desk and wait for somebody a fire marshal, to tell you how to evacuate. You might be waiting for an announcement. You might decide that you're better going up instead of down. That was something that some people on 9/11 did, because a few years previously there'd been a fire in one of the towers where they were airlifted from the roof. So they were using a previous model of survival that was actually incorrect in that situation. And normally the way that people deliberate is they do something called rationalistic decision making, that they'll take all the options open to them and then start weighing them up one against another. And as you can imagine, it doesn't take long before you've got quite a complex matrix of combinations and rankings. Eventually they might get through that deliberation phase and reach a decision, and then they've got to act. In a violent and aggressive situation, this takes far too long, because if you're thinking about dealing with a predatory individual who's planned their attack, you're already behind the curve. You don't have time to deny what's happening to you. You don't have time to go through this deliberation loop of weighing up which is the best option in order to reach a decision that you now must act on. So what we try and teach is choosing the first effective solution. You're not looking for the best solution, which is what rationalistic decision-making tries to make you do. You're looking for the first effective solution. So the first effective solution I'll always try and choose is disengagement. Can I run? Can I get out of here? I might then, if that's not going to be effective, can I posture to this person? Can I show them that they're wrong in choosing me as a victim? If that doesn't work, maybe I look at, can I act submissively towards them? Can I acquiesce to their demand? Is it a demand that I'm happy to acquiesce to?
That's like giving the wallet over. That's, giving the wallet over, right? Yeah,
exactly. Then I might look at fighting as an option. But I'm looking for the first effective solution. I'm not going to weigh up whether running is better than acting submissively. If running works, that's one I choose. So what we're trying to do is get people to have an effective solution straight away that they can act upon. Because really one of the key survival skills when dealing with violent situations is being decisive. There are many great martial artists, technicians who are brilliant in the training environment, though when they're placed out in the real world, they lack decisiveness. And that's one of the characteristics when we look at predators. They're decisive. They've already decided what they're going to do.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I mean, just to play devil's advocate, it seems like if you're talking about choosing the first effective solution, especially for someone who's well trained like you, the first effective solution could be to eliminate the threat, but that could end you up in jail, I suppose, right?
It could, but when I actually look at what violence is, I don't look at it as something between me and the individual I'm facing. Violence is something that happens in an environment, and in that environment, the person I'm dealing with might have third parties who can come to their assistance. I might not have picked up or recognized these individuals. They might be armed, even though they haven't shown me a weapon. And they could, in fact, be more skilled than me, even though, they're not projecting any of those skills. So when I put those assumptions together, do I really want to be involved in an armed multiple assailant situation with somebody who's technically proficient? So even for somebody who's trained, I'm still looking at disengagement as an option because I might not have a full awareness of what's going on around me in the environment.
Very clear. Okay, so let's say that you quickly run through these scenarios and you discover that fighting back is your best or only option.
Yep.
I think, and so then can you talk about that? What to do there?
So the first thing I'm probably going to do, if I've recognized all the warning signs, even before that person has made an attack, I'll try and act preemptively against them. This is a statistic with no substance. It's from my personal experience and talking to those who work in the industry with me. 8 out of 10 fights, the successful person is the person who attacks first. Because few people, whether they're trained or not, recover well after being hit hard or being assaulted. So if you can get the first strike in, then that's kind of your best bet. And legally, you are entitled to do that. A lot of people think an assault involves somebody actually making physical contact with you. From a legal perspective, if somebody puts themselves in a position where they could cause you harm and gives you reason to fear for your safety, that's an assault, and you're entitled to defend yourself. So
right. This is what I learned, just to interject, this is what I learned why they call it assault and battery, right? Assault is the threat and battery is the attack.
Yes, and the attack doesn't even have to land for it to be battery. If you saw somebody pulling their arm back to punch you, that would actually constitute battery as well. So there doesn't even have to be physical contact. The law gives you that right to defend yourself. But you're absolutely right. Assault and battery is the intention or the act of physically assaulting you. So you have that preemptive option. The other option is, can I put something like a barrier and an obstacle between me and the other person? And this is where we get into all of the use of the environment. Can I get an improvised weapon? Because really, if I'm going to be involved in a violent confrontation and I have the ability to arm myself, I should be arming myself. Because why should I put myself at the disadvantage of going in unarmed when I have the potential to go in armed? So that's where we get all into the improvised weapon kind of area.
Yeah, and improvised weapons, I would love for you to take a moment on this, because I have been fascinated with improvised weapons for a long time. I have a friend in Germany named Jörg Sprava who specializes in making really exotic improvised weapons.
Right. So the thing with improvisation is it's a skill, not so much a technical ability. So, for instance, I could do a seminar teaching people to fight with chairs, but that's not really teaching them how to improvise. That's teaching them how to fight with a chair. True improvisation is being able to look into your environment and recognize what in it can be used as a weapon. And the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, use kind of 6 categories. So the way that you're taught to identify what could be used is by comparing objects to 6 different things. So we talk about objects like sticks, or in Hebrew, makel. So it might be a snooker cue, a broom, a golf club. They're objects like a stick, objects like a shield or again, which are bags, clipboards, chairs, trash can lids, anything that could act as a shield or resembles a shield. Objects like a knife, sakin, keys, and this is a good one where if you talk about the use of keys, people who are putting keys between their knuckles, to use like an improvised knuckle duster, are not using the key according to its attributes because it closely resembles a knife. So it's better to hold it between your thumb and forefinger and actually slash and cut with it. Objects like rock, then snooker balls, water bottles, those type of things. Flexible objects like a chain, havel, belts, dog leads, wires, and then small objects, katnim, which are projectiles, such as coins that you could throw in somebody's face. So when you're in an environment, what you're looking for in terms of improvised weapon is what resembles a stick, a shield, a knife, a rock, a chain, or as a small object that you could use. And true improvisation is being to categorize the objects in your environment to those kind of weapons. What do they resemble? And you then have things where you could prioritize. So I might have the choice, let's take a beer bottle. I could use it as an impact object. If I hold it and put my thumb over the top and it's got some liquid in, and I can use it to deliver concussive force. And that might actually be a better use of it than smashing it and using it like a knife. Because with a knife, it might not be as decisive or as quick to end the fight. Okay, I end up cutting the person a lot, but I'm not really taking them out of the game. Whereas if I use the bottle like a rock, like a stone, and use it for impact and deliver concussive force, then I may be able to knock the guy out. So even when we look at objects and their use, there might be a preference according to the situation we're in. If I'm trying to escape from a group where I'm not going to have the option to deliver concussive force to each member, it might be better for me to smash it and basically slash the broken bottle around to keep everybody away as I make my escape. So we need to look at whether the weapons fit those categories. And we also need to understand if they're weapons of carry or of opportunity. So weapons of carry are things that we have about our person. So, for instance, a mobile phone. That's something we're carrying. A weapon of opportunity would be something like a chair that we could pick up. It's opportunistic. And we also need to understand the environmental advantages that the landscape and the terrain can give us. So can we use, for instance, let's say somebody attacks me in a parking lot, swinging a bat. If I can move between 2 parked cars, I limit the range that guy can swing it, so he can really only deliver overhand attacks. So if I start understanding what I can use as a weapon and how I can use the environment, I start to increase my survival chances.
Yeah, that is really smart. I guess we should move on to misconceptions about violence and training. Situational awareness. We should talk about that.
Okay. So situational awareness is one of those things which people will often tell you should be more situationally aware, but they rarely tell you how to. And we see this a lot when, there's been a series of assaults in a particular area and the police come on and tell people you need to be more aware. And this is not me having a go at the police. They're there for law enforcement. They're not really there for education of the population. But they rarely say this is how you're going to become more aware. So we need to understand what we're being aware of. And this is where certain pieces of advice like not running with your headphones on, that's great. But if you're not at the same time aware of what you should be aware of, it really doesn't matter if you've got headphones on or not. So when we look at situational awareness, there's sort of several factors that we're looking at. One is the environment. I want to know where the entry and exit routes are, and also where points of concealment are. And you see this a lot in like active shooter situations where people to run to the nearest exit. The problem is if you're in a crowded environment, that nearest exit might get blocked very, very quickly. So what you also need to understand is where are the secondary exits in an environment. So a good example in the Florida nightclub shooting was when the security guys recognized that one of the alternative exits was through the DJ's area. So basically you open the doors and let people out. If you're in a restaurant where somebody starts going on a rampage killing, your natural default route might be to head for the main doors. But if there's a large crowd that are trying to get out and the doors open inward, it's going to be difficult for everybody to exit. And also you've got to think about it as a large target mass that the shooter can aim at. But if you recognize also that through the kitchens leads to a secondary exit out of the back, that might actually be a better route to go down. So part of situational awareness is understanding the environment that you're in and also how other people are going to behave and act in that environment. You've also got attacker behavior. I mean, one of the biggest signals that we kind of touched on was people's movement towards you. If somebody wants to attack you, they have to move towards you and synchronize that movement. If you can identify that, then you've got a good chance of taking yourself away from the danger and out of that environment. So when we start looking at what situational awareness actually is, it's having that good understanding of the physical location you're in. Where are the exits? Where are the entries? Because you also want to know where could another attacker come from? Where could they conceal themselves in? And that allows you kind of to plot your route safely through that environment as you disengage. Windows are another example of an exit or entry route. Many people don't see them as such. Yet again, if an active shooter was to come into that environment, good situational awareness might tell you that your best bet is to climb out through the window rather than head to one of the more conventional exits or entrances.
Right.
And then we have the behaviors such as we were talking before, which was target glancing. Another thing that a lot of people will do before they attack is scan. So they'll check for the presence of law enforcement and CCTV. Few people, if you think about it, actually have any reason to look behind them unless they're worried about being observed. So I'm always trying to be very aware of who's looking at the environment. They might be looking to check that an exit route that they plan to disengage through has remained clear. They might also change the body. A classic attack line of somebody with a knife is as they approach you is to turn their torso away. This allows them to pull the knife hidden so they can keep it by their side. And it also means that they're not facing you. So if you're trying to engage with them and tell them, hey, what's up? They don't have to acknowledge you. So all these kind of actions and behaviors coupled with that understanding of the environment go into making what situational awareness is.
Yeah, that's good. And that sort of goes with, I actually have a question for you specifically about the active shooter scenario, because we did a whole episode on that. And I feel like that you talked about how the attacker or the predator already has a plan and you don't, so they have the advantage. And I just feel like with an active shooter, I mean, which again, it's so rare that you would end up in this scenario, but if you did, wouldn't it be best just to charge the guy immediately and try to just take him out?
Yes. I kind of try and stay away from kind of like absolute answers, but if you are in range to make that connection, engage with them, then yes. We do a lot of drills around active shooter where we'll give somebody a replica rifle, such as a shotgun, and you'll tell people as a group to charge them down. And if you charge them down from several directions, normally only 2 or 3 shots get let off before the person is bundled to the ground and incapacitated. And it's important to remember that you don't just want to take the weapon off the guy, you want to incapacitate them, because most active shooters will have a handgun or a second weapon or even a knife on them to continue their rampage. If you then tell the group to run, far more casualties. One of the things when we look at the casualty rate in active shooter situations, it's the longer the event goes on before the medical services can get there, the higher the number of casualties. So, for example, if somebody started shooting and you charged them down, even if people had been shot, because the medical services would be able to get to them sooner, they're much more likely to survive. Whereas if you again look at something like the Florida nightclub shooting that went on for 4 hours, there were people, if that event had ended within, say, 10 minutes and had their injuries treated, would have survived, but they bled out in 4 hours. So if you can end the shooter incident in the shortest possible time, you lower the casualty count. The issue you have is it's very hard to get individuals to charge somebody who's shooting a gun, knowing that they could get shot but possibly survive, when they, I would say, think or believe that by disengaging and running, their survival chances as an individual increase. But I would suggest that if you are in a confined area where you're not going to be able to make an exit quickly and you're near enough to the attacker to charge them down, and it doesn't have to be any more complex than that. There's several school shooting incidents which have been stopped by students who basically charged down the shooter. And they might have received relatively minor injuries in the process, but they ended the shooting incident. So engagement is definitely an option if you are in that position to do so.
Right. I just always think if we could make it sort of a national
absolutely
policy that, if we could train, like, hey, if you see a shooter, just run at them and tackle them, and then incapacitate them, somehow these shooters would stop.
Yeah. I mean, this is when we go into schools and colleges where we have an audience who can be trained as a group or a workplace. We can get that message across. What would be fantastic is if you could have that national message that this is nationally how we are going to respond to shooter incidents. And recognize that,
that's what we changed in air travel.
Yes.
Instead of appeasing hijackers, it's attack full on with everything, even if there's a bad outcome at the end.
And, because you're going to have a bad outcome anyway. You might as well get out fighting.
Well, it was the motive that changed, that they weren't just taking the plane for a political statement. It was they may be using it as a weapon. Therefore, you've got to, attack the people right away and assume that any delay is furthering their goal somehow.
And I think this is one of the issues, we talked a little bit about denial and effective decision making, but denial goes a long way back. And I think a lot of people can't believe that a person will go into a crowded location and start shooting at them, because they look at it from an individual perspective and go, why would they want to shoot at me? And that's the wrong question to be asking, because somebody who's engaging in a rampage killing is just looking for the maximum number of casualties that they can get. And when you start looking at it from that perspective, where, they're just looking to kill you. They're not looking to negotiate with you. They're not looking to get something off you. They're looking to end your life. When you start getting it down to that level, just the same way as when you had the plane crashes and terrorists hijacking planes basically for suicide missions, they're not using you as a bargaining chip. They just want to kill you. When you actually boil everything down to that level, and we get right down to the essence of survival, you have a choice, which is fight or flight. And if you're on a crowded plane, you haven't got a flight option. If you're in a confined environment, such as a nightclub or a school, you might not have a flight option. And if you don't, you need to consider your other options, which might include barricading yourself in a room. But one of those options that has to be on the table and considered is engagement with the shooter.
Yeah.
I had a question here that might fit into this. You presented to Google audience, Google headquarters in Boston in 2015. Yep. And as I was watching that, that's a video that's available, I started to wonder if this wasn't so much about Krav Maga, but things that the Google people could take away and apply in different areas, whether it was computer security or designing software, because you're almost talking, as you say, a system of protective measures. Yes. You're basically working with probabilities and statistics and predictable outcomes, which has a huge area.
It's one of the things where we often get contacted by corporate clients, and their initial goal is they want us to provide self-defense training. And what they mean by self-defense training is, how do I escape from this? What do I do if somebody grabs me, etc., etc. What we always try and steer them towards is this personal safety. We refer to it in the industry as self-protection, the stuff that you use to predict, identify, and avoid being targeted or to identify threats and dangers. And it's a much more beneficial skill to have. My background, or part of my background, was in close protection or bodyguarding. In that situation, what you're doing is trying to avoid violence at every cost. The principal, the person that you're looking after, doesn't want to be involved in any aggressive incident. So you plan to make sure that you never take them into an area or put them in a situation where they're going to face or experience that. And if whilst you're going about your business, you see those situations developing, you move them away from there. And these aren't physical skills. This is kind of like head knowledge and an understanding of how violent situations develop. And that's something we can teach somebody without actually sort of stepping out onto the mats, and they're those skills which will actually deal with probably 95% of potentially violent situations. And I feel it's a great irony, and I feel this myself as a self-defense instructor, that I spend a lot of time teaching people physical skills and solutions, where really, if they were able to adopt and put into practice a lot of this kind of head knowledge, understanding of criminal process, they would deal with most of the situations without ever having to engage physically with somebody. And that's part of what we try and do with our training, is to create scenarios, create context, teach what we refer to as pre-violence indicators, those things such as target glancing, particular movements which indicate that somebody has harmful intent towards you. And you're absolutely right, that it's because it's conceptual and because it's principle-based. If you want to use it for IT security, cybersecurity, the same principles will be applied. We just need to understand how a cyber criminal operates, what their process is, how do they target a particular victim, which in this case might be a system. And it's the same thing. What are their equivalents of target glancing? And when we start to understand that everything is principle and conceptual based, we can start to apply it to a lot of different areas and not just to our own personal security.
Yeah, I was thinking about office politics when I worked for big corporations, and I think about attack must follow defense at the earliest opportunity, and thinking back to certain scenarios where that would have been the right move for me.
Yeah.
Or waiting until I mean, I could see like Google, instead of wondering or watching an attack, say a computer attack unfold, is the moment somebody steps out of line, that glance backwards or that environmental scan, is that you go a full-on attack on them, and they're not expecting it because they think you're just watching them poke around.
Yeah.
And here you are trying to shut down their network. And
it's being decisive. Like you say, at that moment, already kind of having the pre-plan in place and being able to implement it decisively. If you look on many cybersecurity attacks, such as a denial of service, it starts with, obviously not everything at once. It starts with bandwidth starting to being taken. But a lot of times we end up as spectators in these situations, trying to understand what's actually happening rather than recognizing what's happening and then acting on it. So if we understand that any kind of crime is a process, and we understand what are the warning signs and accept them. There's in philosophy a kind of decision-making idea called Occam's razor, which basically says, the least number of assumptions that you have to make probably defines the correct option. So a lot of the times, though, we end up making assumptions. So if we're walking and somebody's walking behind us and we pick up on those footsteps, we'll start making a lot of assumptions as to, maybe they're catching up with us to hand us something we dropped. Maybe they're trying to get past us. Let's say we cross the road and they follow us. How many more assumptions do you have to make before you come to the conclusion that basically they've synchronized their movement with yours because they have harmful intent towards you? But really, we end up assuming, and we don't act decisively. And you see this in denial of service attacks, where it's like, bandwidth is up today. Maybe we're just getting more traffic than normal, without looking at what that traffic is actually doing, and then quickly deciding, okay, this is not normal traffic to the site. Is there a way that we can choke the bandwidth? Is there a way we can free up bandwidth in another direction? So again, all of these things are kind of security is security. And if we're able to recognize threats early on, we're able to recognize that we're making assumptions to try and deny that it's an attack, and we can be decisive and choose the first effective solution, we can now start dealing with things much quicker and catch up to that predator or that attacker who's already ahead of us on the curve.
Excellent.
Well, Gershon, that was fantastic. If I could nominate you for a full-on TED Talk, I would do so.
Thank you very much.
You really, it's just so clear and so illuminating, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
To our listeners, check out Real World Solutions to Real World Violence. You won't regret it. If you're in the Boston area, look up Krav Maga of Boston so you can go take classes. Gershon, please come back on the show again. We'll talk about whatever you want. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, inspiring. Wonderful.
You've been listening to the Survivalist Podcast with Mark Puhali, Doc Montana, and Matt Gould. Brought to you by Survival Cash, Forge Survival Supply, Epic Water Bottles and Filters, and the Terry Blade. Please visit our website, thesurvivalistpodcast.com, for more information.